He was just a single dad trying to survive one long shift at a time until a strange grocery order with no address led him to the 20th floor of a silent high-rise, and to a woman who said she didn't order food. She ordered him. What happened next wasn't fate. It was something quieter, something stronger. If you believe in the unexpected power of kindness, stay with us. This story just might change the way you see love, healing, and second chances. And if you enjoy heartfelt, meaningful stories like this one, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep sharing what truly matters. Now, let's begin. Single dad delivered groceries by mistake. The woman inside said, "I ordered something else, you." Rain smeared across the windshield like a restless ghost streaking under the wipers that groaned in protest. Ben's fingers tightened around the steering wheel of the dented Ford Escape as he pulled up to the curb, the navigation app blinking uncertainly. He checked the address for the third time. Nothing matched. "Order 287, he muttered. 10th Avenue Building, C, floor 20. It didn't make sense. The app listed no apartment number, no customer name, just a vague delivery note. Floor 20. The recipient will recognize kindness. Ben exhaled, glancing at the back seat where a brown paper bag of groceries shifted slightly with every bump. Some quinoa almond milk kale, definitely not the usual late-night pizza or soda. Someone health-conscious or rich, probably both. The building looming before him was sleek and far too elegant for someone like him. Clean glass facade, gold-trimmed lobby security guard behind a marble desk. This was the kind of place where the walls didn't peel and the elevator didn't groan like it had a smoking problem. Ben wiped rain from his jacket, grabbed the bag, and walked in. The security guard barely glanced up. "Delivery," Ben nodded. "Yeah, floor 20, order 287. The guard frowned. "No apartment number. No, just—" "The recipient will recognize kindness." A dry laugh. Sounds like a scam. Ben offered a half smile. "If it is, I'm getting wet for free." He rode the elevator up in silence, heart racing a little harder than the setting warranted. The lights flickered faintly above him. He hadn't been in a place this clean since the night Ella was born, when life still felt hopeful before things like hospital bills and eviction notices piled up like angry letters. The doors parted on the 20th floor with a hiss. A long, carpeted hallway stretched before him, hushed and still. Every door looked the same sleek dark wood with silver numbers. Except one, Unit 2002. The number was missing. Instead, someone had written something in soft chalk across the door, "Truth knocks once." "Will you?" Ben stared at it. The fluorescent light above buzzed quietly. For a moment he thought of turning back, of reporting the order as undeliverable and heading home to Ella. But something tugged at him. Something soft, like a whisper. He knocked. A moment passed. Then another. The door creaked open, not fully, just enough to reveal her. She looked like she had stepped out of a dream, or maybe a magazine ad from a life he couldn't afford to imagine. A woman in her 30s, tall, with pale skin and dark eyes that carried too many nights without sleep. Her brown hair was loosely tied to strands slightly damp, as if she too had walked through the storm. She wore a cream-colored robe that fell to her knees. No makeup, no jewelry, just her, raw and unguarded. And then she said it. "I didn't order food," she whispered. "I ordered something else." "You?" Ben blinked. "Excuse me?" Her lips curved in the faintest smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Come in, please." He hesitated. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. I'm just here to deliver." "Exactly," she interrupted softly. "You delivered. That's more than most people ever do." She turned and walked into the apartment, leaving the door open. Ben stood frozen in the hallway, heart thudding. The reasonable part of him screamed to leave. But something else, maybe the exhaustion, maybe the rain, maybe the way she said "you like it" meant something more, pulled him forward. He stepped inside. The apartment was quiet. Not opulent, but tasteful. Minimal. Clean lines, soft lighting. There were no personal touches, no family photos, no clutter, no warmth. It was like someone had moved in and hadn't decided whether they'd stay. She was pouring tea in the kitchen when he entered. Chamomile, she asked without turning. "I shouldn't stay," he said. She set a mug on the counter. "You look like you haven't had a warm drink in hours." "I have a daughter," he said simply. "She's waiting at home." That made her look up. Her expression softened. "How old? 8. Her name's Ella. Beautiful name." She paused. "You're a single dad." He nodded. She took a sip of tea, then walked to the window. Rain streaked down the glass like silent tears. "You're wondering if I'm crazy," she said. "I'm wondering if I should be worried." She turned, finally facing him with the full weight of whatever burden she carried. "I'm not dangerous," she said. "I'm just tired of being invisible. I needed one night where someone knocked on the door and wasn't paid to lie to me." Ben's fingers curled tighter around the paper bag. "I'm not here to lie," he said. "I know. That's why I wrote that note." He looked at her, really looked and saw it. Not just beauty, not sadness, but weariness that went bone deep. The kind you only get when you've smiled too long for people who never once asked if you were okay. He set the grocery bag down on the counter. "So, you don't want this?" She shook her head. "No, but I think I needed what came with it." Ben didn't have a response for that. So he picked up the mug and drank. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, not cold. Just full. Then a phone rang. Ben reached into his pocket, pulling out his old flip phone. The screen flickered. It was Ella's babysitter. He answered. Her voice was frantic. "Ben, she's having a spell, her breathing's off again." "I called the ambulance." Ben dropped the mug. "I'm coming." He turned to go, heart racing, but the woman had already grabbed her coat and keys. "Where do you live?" she asked. "What I'll drive. You'll lose time calling a cab." "But no time to argue," she said. "Let's go." The rain had turned into a torrential sheet by the time they reached the street. Ivy's car, a sleek black Audi parked in a private space out front, responded to her voice command as if obeying a general. Ben barely registered it. His thoughts were 1,000 miles ahead, with Ella, with the fear in the babysitter's voice, with the memory of holding his daughter's tiny hand as she struggled to breathe. Ivy drove like someone who knew the city but didn't belong to it. Confident, silent, focused. The wipers sliced across the windshield with rhythmic urgency. She glanced at him once quickly. "What's her condition?" she asked. "Congenital heart defect. Hypoplastic left heart syndrome. We're on the wait list for a transplant." Ivy's knuckles tightened on the wheel. "How long has she been waiting? Over a year. She's had 2 minor surgeries, but he stopped swallowing. They said her body's getting tired. She's a fighter, but I don't know how much more she can take." They turned sharply onto 8th Avenue lights bleeding across the wet asphalt. Ben noticed for the first time that Ivy wasn't wearing makeup, that her nails weren't painted. For a woman who looked like she belonged in a boardroom or on a magazine cover, there was something stripped down about her. Real. And that made her more difficult to read. "Take the left at 42nd, he said, voice hoarse. "Building's next to the laundromat." She didn't speak, didn't ask more questions, just drove. When they arrived, an ambulance was already parked out front, lights flashing silently. Ben jumped out before the car stopped, completely racing up the steps of the aging apartment building. Ivy followed. Inside, a paramedic crouched next to Ella, who lay on the couch wrapped in her pink blanket, her lips tinged with blue. The babysitter, Maria, wrung her hands nearby. Ben dropped to his knees beside his daughter. "I'm here, baby girl. I'm here." Ella's eyes fluttered open. "Daddy, I've got you." The paramedic looked up. "She's stable now, but she needs oxygen, and we're taking her in for monitoring." Her vitals were dropping. Ben nodded, but his hands trembled. Ella whimpered as they placed the mask over her face. He brushed her hair back with the gentlest touch he could manage. The fragility of her life was something he carried like a stone in his chest. Every day. When the paramedics loaded Ella onto the gurney, Ivy stepped back. Ben turned to her, about to say something, but she spoke first. I'll follow behind. You ride with her." He hesitated. "I want to," she added. "Let me." Ben nodded, once then followed his daughter into the back of the ambulance. The waiting room was cold and too white, humming with fluorescent lights and quiet dread. Ben sat hunched in a plastic chair, still damp from the rain head in his hands. Time passed in limbo. Ivy appeared 20 minutes later, somehow dry, holding 2 steaming cups. "Tea," she said. "Chamomile." He looked up, weary. "Thank you." She sat beside him, not too close, but close enough to feel present. The scent of her, a mix of rain and clean linen, settled around them. "You didn't have to come," Ben said, voice low. "I know." Silence stretched. "I'm sorry if I frightened you earlier," she said, hands wrapped around the cup. "I didn't plan to say what I said at the door. It just came out." Ben gave a tired chuckle. "You caught me off guard, yeah? But it wasn't creepy. Just weird. And maybe weird's what I needed tonight." She smiled faintly. "Good weird." He shrugged. "I don't know yet." Another silence. But this time it felt different, softer, like shared understanding. "Do you live alone?" he asked, then quickly added, "Sorry, that's probably too personal." "It's okay." She looked down at her tea. "Yes, I've lived alone for a long time, even when I wasn't technically alone." Ben didn't respond. He understood that line too well. "I wasn't supposed to be there tonight," she said after a pause. "In that apartment. It's not my real home." Ben frowned. "Then why were you there?" She took a sip. "Because it's the only place where I can disappear." There was something fragile in her voice now. Not dramatic, just unguarded. Ben leaned back. "You running from something?" She turned her head toward him. "I'm running from everything." A nurse appeared, then breaking the spell. "Mr. Hadley, your daughter's stable. She's asking for you." Ben stood quickly, setting down his tea. "Thank you," he said to Ivy. "For everything." "Go," she said, nodding. "I'll be here." He paused, surprised. "You don't have to wait." "I know." He hesitated, then disappeared through the double doors. Ivy sat alone. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, scrolling past message after message. "Where are you?" "You're embarrassing the family. You have 48 hours before the press gets wind. Come back. We can fix this." She deleted them all. Her reflection in the window stared back, hollow but honest. For once, she wasn't wearing the mask of the CEO, the daughter of legacy, the bride-to-be. For once, she wasn't being watched. She thought of Ben, of the way he held Ella like she was his whole world, of the exhaustion behind his eyes, of the strength it took to keep showing up when life kept breaking you down. Maybe she thought this accidental meeting was no accident at all. She took another sip of tea, letting it warm the emptiness inside her. Her countdown had begun, but not the one they were all chasing. This was a different kind of countdown. One that might just lead her home. The hospital room was dim lit only by the soft glow of a wall sconce and the quiet pulse of the monitor beside Ella's bed. A rhythmic beeping echoed like a lullaby of hope, each beat a reminder that life, though fragile, still burned inside her. Ben sat in the armchair next to his daughter, her small hand curled around 2 of his fingers. She looked paler than usual, her hair damp with sweat, but her eyes were open, watching him, with the curious intensity that only children seem to possess. "Daddy?" She whispered, her voice thin beneath the oxygen mask. "You came fast." He smiled, his voice hoarse. "Always Peanut. I'd outrun a lightning bolt if it meant getting to you." Her lips tugged up slightly under the mask. "I dreamed you were flying." Ben blinked back, the sting in his eyes. "Maybe I was." She looked over toward the door. "Is the lady still here?" Ben hesitated. "Yeah. She's in the waiting room." "She was pretty," Ella said softly. "She looked like someone from the movies." Ben chuckled. "She does, huh?" Ella's hand tightened slightly on his, but her eyes were sad. He looked at his daughter, surprised. You saw that? She nodded slowly. People can be pretty and sad at the same time, Daddy. Ben didn't know what to say to that. His daughter, wise beyond her years, had a way of cutting straight through things. Maybe it was the pain she carried. Maybe it was just who she was. A nurse stepped in gently. We'll be monitoring her vitals every hour. She's stable for now. You can stay the night. Ben nodded, and the nurse gave him a warm smile before slipping out. As the room settled back into stillness, Ben leaned in close to Ella's ear. You sleep okay. I'll be right here. She gave a faint nod, eyes already growing heavy. Once she drifted off, Ben stood slowly and stepped into the hallway, closing the door with a soft click. He found Ivy still in the same chair, still holding her now cold tea. She looked up as he approached as if she hadn't moved in hours, though it had only been one. She's resting, Ben said quietly. Ivy nodded. She's strong, like her father. Ben sat down beside her, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline that hadn't quite faded. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, he confessed, voice nearly a whisper. Working 2 jobs, praying her heart holds out, pretending to her that I'm not scared every second of every day. Ivy didn't respond right away. She looked down at her tea, then said, You don't have to pretend with me. The words settled between them like a secret. Ben ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You didn't sign up for it. I did, actually, she said, surprising him. I opened the door. You also said you ordered me, which I have to admit was a little unsettling. Ivy smiled genuinely this time. Okay, fair point. He turned to her. You said that apartment isn't really your home, that you're running. From what she didn't flinch. Instead, she looked out the window at the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. From a wedding, she said. From a man I don't love. From a family that treats emotions like liabilities. From a life that looks perfect in photos and feels like a prison in reality. Ben was silent, but his eyes softened. I was supposed to get married in 4 days, Ivy continued. The guest list is full of people I barely know. The menu cost more than most people's yearly salary. I had fittings and press releases and a stylist named Luca who kept telling me to smile with my eyes. And all I could think was, what if I just disappeared? So you did. She nodded. I rented that apartment under a different name, canceled all my appointments, turned off my phones except one, the one they can't trace. Ben exhaled. You really planned it. I planned everything. Except you. He blinked, caught off guard by the weight in her voice. I wrote that message in the app because I thought it would be funny, some kind of cosmic joke to remind myself I still had control over something. She paused. But then you showed up. And then Ella. Her voice trailed off. Ben leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. You're not what I expected either. She smiled again, this time softer. What did you expect, someone cold? Entitled, maybe a little crazy. And now Ben glanced sideways at her. You're still a little crazy, but in a way that makes me feel less alone. They both laughed quietly. It wasn't loud or long, but it felt real, like something cracked open between them. Ivy reached into her coat and pulled out a small card. This is a number, she said, for a private pediatric cardiac foundation. They fund emergency cases. They won't cover everything, but they move fast. No red tape. Ben stared at it, hesitant. I didn't ask for help, he said. I know, she replied. That's why it's worth giving. He took the card, fingers brushing hers. Why are you really here? He asked. Tonight, I mean. You didn't have to follow me. You didn't even know us. Ivy's voice was barely audible, because for the first time in years, I wanted to be where something real was happening. They sat there a while longer, 2 strangers stitched together by accident and rain and something neither could name just yet. And somewhere inside that sterile hospital between the pulse of monitors and the whisper of night, a new rhythm began to form. One that didn't belong to fear or loneliness but to something small and undeniable. Hope. The night deepened as the hospital quieted that particular kind of silence found only in buildings full of hope and hurt. Ivy hadn't planned to stay, but something rooted her there, something heavier than obligation and more tender than guilt. Ben had returned to Ella's room hours ago. Ivy, left alone in the family lounge, sat curled into a chair near the window, one leg tucked under her coat folded beside her like an old promise. The vending machine across the hall hummed. The clock ticked past 1:00 a.m. She wasn't tired. She wasn't restless either. What she was aware of her own breathing, of the warmth of the tea Ben hadn't finished, of the sudden clarity that this night wasn't like any other she'd lived in years. She didn't belong to a schedule here. No assistant would walk in with a clipboard. No PR manager would remind her to stay polished. Here she could just exist. And no one was watching. The elevator dinged. A janitor stepped out humming a Johnny Cash song under his breath. He gave her a polite nod and she returned it. No one here knew who she was. No one cared. And that was the miracle. At 1:22 a.m., Ben appeared. He moved like someone who hadn't slept in a long time, shoulders slumped, face drawn, but when he saw her, his expression softened. "She's sleeping," he said quietly. "Color's coming back." Thank God, Ivy breathed. I was starting to feel like I might chew off my own nails. He offered a small smile, then settled into the chair across from her. "You didn't leave," he said. She raised a brow. "Was I supposed to?" He shrugged. "Most people do." They sat in silence again, not awkwardly, just in that quiet way two people do when they don't have to fill the space. Ivy glanced over at him. "Do you always carry that much fear in your eyes?" Ben didn't look at her, but his voice was steady. "Only when it comes to her." She nodded slowly. "I know that look. My father wore it the day my mother collapsed on stage during a shareholder meeting. He was terrified. But he wouldn't admit it. Said fear was weakness." Ben turned his head toward her, brows furrowed. "My father taught me how to command a boardroom before I learned how to tie my shoes," she said with a slight laugh. "He used to say emotions make a woman dangerous." "People don't follow feelings, Ivy. They follow control." Ben exhaled. "Sounds exhausting." It was. She paused. "Still is. That's why I ran." He leaned forward slightly. "What made you write that note on the app?" Ivy smirked. "Honestly, I was joking. I'd never used a grocery app before. I was scrolling thinking maybe I'd try and feel normal, and there was a box for special instructions. So I wrote, 'Deliver to floor 20. The recipient will recognize kindness.'" She met his eyes. "And then you showed up, looking like you'd just run through a storm. And somehow, it felt like I'd meant it." Ben let that settle. "I guess you got what you ordered," he said, "even if it was off the menu." They both laughed quietly. She tilted her head. "You ever think the universe works like that? Tosses you into rooms you weren't supposed to be in just to see what happens?" Ben rubbed his jaw. "I don't know if it's the universe, but I believe in Ella's luck. She has this way of pulling miracles out of broken things." A nurse passed by with a clipboard offering a warm nod. Ivy watched her go, then turned to Ben. "Tell me about her mom," she said softly. He didn't flinch, just breathed in deep. "Sarah was sunlight," he began. "The kind that made everything feel possible. We met at a garage I worked at. She brought in this beat-up Toyota with more rust than engine. Said it had been her mom's and she wanted to keep it alive." He smiled at the memory. "We fought over the price. I offered to fix it free. She said she'd marry me instead." Ivy smiled. "That's a trade." She was a nurse. Smart. Brave. Thought the world was still worth saving. His voice dropped. "She died in a hit-and-run 3 years ago. Walked Ella to school and never came back." Ivy's breath caught. "Ben, I'm so sorry." He nodded, his jaw clenched. "It broke everything. For a while, I didn't know how to get up. But Ella, she needed me. So I got up." Ivy looked at him, then really looked. The lines on his face, the weariness in his body, the fire in his eyes when he spoke of his daughter. "You're a good father," she said. "I'm a man doing his best with a half-deck," he replied, "but I love her." Fiercely. "That's everything." Ben leaned back, arms crossed. "What about you? You said you were supposed to get married." She nodded slowly. 4 days from now, to a man who thinks my value is in my stock portfolio and my lineage." Ben raised a brow. His mother once told me she looked forward to turning me into the next power wife of America. I almost asked her if that came with a cape and tights. He laughed loud sudden. She liked that sound. It made the sterile hallway feel warmer. Ivy lowered her voice. "Do you know what scared me the most?" Ben shook his head. "That I was going to say yes. That I was going to walk down that aisle, smile for the cameras, and lose myself completely." "Then you did the bravest thing Ben said. You stopped it." Ivy swallowed hard. "I'm not sure I stopped it. I just paused it, hid for a while. And then Ella happened. You happened." A silence deeper this time settled between them, the kind that speaks more than words. Then Ben stood, stretching slightly. "Come on." She looked up. "Where to the vending machine?" "I think we earned at least 1 bag of peanut M&Ms. Ivy stood and followed. "Now you're speaking my language." And as they walked side by side down the quiet hallway, 2 people with cracked hearts and too many secrets, the hum of something unspoken traveled with them. Not romance, not rescue, but recognition. 2 strangers beginning to see each other not for what they were running from, but for what they might be running toward. The apartment was quiet when Ben opened the door the next afternoon, the late autumn sun slanting through the tall windows in soft gold. He carried Ella in his arms. She was still weak, still sleepy, but the doctors had given the green light for her to go home with instructions, oxygen support, and a folder full of next steps. Ivy followed a quiet presence behind them, holding a small bag of prescriptions from the hospital pharmacy. She hadn't said much during the ride home, but her silence wasn't heavy. It was watchful, gentle. The kind of silence that comes from knowing how not to push someone when they're holding themselves together by threads. Ben laid Ella down gently on the pull-out couch near the windows. She stirred, murmured something about pancakes and starlight, then fell back into sleep. He turned to Ivy, who set the bag on the counter, then folded her arms. She looked strange here, he thought. Not out of place, but misplaced. Like someone too polished for these scuffed hardwood floors and peeling kitchen cabinets. But instead of looking uncomfortable, she seemed curious, as though she were cataloging the life he lived, trying it on in her mind. Ben offered her a seat, but Ivy stayed standing. "You want some tea?" he asked. She nodded. "Only if it's the cheap kind." He smirked. "Is there another kind?" As the kettle whistled, Ivy wandered toward the bookshelf near the couch. It wasn't much, just some worn paperbacks, a few children's books, and an old framed photo of Ben and Sarah on a fishing trip. Ivy picked it up her fingers, brushing the cracked glass. "She was beautiful," she said. "She was everything," Ben replied quietly from the kitchen. Ivy set the photo back down with surprising care, then glanced toward the hallway. "May I?" She gestured. "Go ahead," Ben said. "Bathroom's the second door. Ignore the first. It's kind of a catch-all." She nodded and walked slowly down the hall, boots clicking softly on the old wood. She passed the first door, but something tugged at her, an open sliver light slipping through. Curiosity pulled her hand to the knob. The door creaked open. Inside the room was small. A folding table leaned against one wall. Boxes, a stack of unpaid bills, a few of Ella's toys, a broken lamp, and on the far side, hanging neatly on a crooked nail, was a dress. It wasn't fancy, not designer, just simple white satin with a lace hem aged slightly with time. Ivy stepped closer. It was a wedding dress. She blinked, the breath catching in her throat. She reached out and touched the fabric. It was soft, light. Behind her, Ben's voice came low and careful. She picked it out 2 weeks before the accident, said it was the first thing she bought just for herself in years. Ivy turned slowly. Ben stood in the doorway, mug in hand. "I didn't mean to snoop," she said, stepping back. He shook his head. "It's okay. Most people pretend not to see it." She looked at the dress again. "You kept it." Ben leaned against the doorframe. "I couldn't throw it out, and I couldn't bear to pack it away. So, it lives here now, in limbo." There was a long pause. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic through the cracked window pane. "I think she'd be proud," Ivy said finally. Ben looked at her, one brow raised. "Of what you, Ella, the way you keep going." He let out a soft laugh. "I don't know about proud. Probably irritated that I can't cook worth a damn." Ivy smiled, but it faded as she looked back at the dress. "I almost wore one just like that," she said. "Not because I loved it, but because someone told me it made my waist look powerful." Ben frowned. "That's a weird sentence. Welcome to my world." They stepped out of the room together and walked back into the kitchen. Ben handed her the mug, and they sat at the small table in the corner. "I used to imagine what she'd look like in it," Ben said, staring into his tea, standing there laughing because the hem caught on the deck, smiling that smile that meant she was about to say something smart. He paused. "Now, I don't let myself imagine too much. It hurts less that way." Ivy was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you still wear your ring?" Ben held up his hand. His ring finger was bare. "Not anymore. I keep it in a drawer. Ella asked once if she could have it when she got older. I told her maybe." He glanced at her. "Do you wear yours?" Ivy stared into her cup. "I never got one." There was a whole plan custom-cut diamond antique band French engraving. But it never happened. Not because he didn't want to, because I kept putting it off. Ben tilted his head. "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because deep down I knew I wasn't ready to promise something I didn't believe in." They sat there in the quiet hum of late afternoon, the sunlight slipping across the floor like a soft memory. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but something more delicate, more dangerous. Trust. Just then, Ella stirred on the couch, coughing slightly. Ben was up in a flash, checking her oxygen, adjusting her blanket. Ivy watched the way he moved the instinctive tenderness in his hands. She felt something unfamiliar bloom quietly in her chest. Not attraction, not admiration, but envy. Envy of how sure he was in that role. Envy of how clearly he loved. She realized she had never been loved like that. Not by anyone, not even herself. And for the first time in years she wanted to stay a little longer. Just to watch. Just to learn what that kind of love looked like when it was real. The living room was cloaked in a soft end-of-day hush. Outside, the last rays of sun dripped gold across the windowsill, casting a warm glow over the modest space. Ivy sat cross-legged on the floor beside Ella, who was propped up with pillows and a fuzzy pink blanket crayon scattered like confetti around them. Ben stood in the kitchen a few feet away, pretending to clean, but really watching the two of them as if it were a movie he didn't want to miss a second of. Something about seeing Ivy, this polished, elusive woman in sweatpants, her hair tied in a loose braid coloring beside his daughter like it was the most natural thing in the world, tugged at something deep in him. "She wants me to draw a unicorn with wings," Ivy said over her shoulder, "but she insists it must be anatomically correct." Ella grinned beneath the edge of her oxygen mask. "Pegasi aren't unicorns, Miss Ivy. That's like saying a dolphin is just a wet cat." Ben laughed, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "She's been like this since she was 4. The vet at the petting zoo told her pigs don't fly, and she wrote him a letter explaining the aerodynamics of bumblebees." "She sounds terrifying," Ivy said. "She's unstoppable," Ben replied, a smile playing at the edge of his mouth. Ivy turned back to Ella. "Okay, Miss Unstoppable, help me out." "What color is a scientifically plausible flying horse? Purple?" Ella said without hesitation. Obviously, Ivy murmured and began coloring. After a few minutes, Ella's breathing slowed and she leaned back, growing tired again. Her crayon fell from her hand and Ivy gently picked it up. "Do you believe in stars?" Ella asked suddenly. Evie looked over. The ones in the sky, Ella nodded, then pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from under her blanket. She held it up. It was a drawing, rough and faded, but clear enough. A 5-pointed star surrounded by clouds and tiny words written in a child's careful scrawl. My mom said everyone has a star, that even when they're gone, they stay up there. Watching. Ivy's throat tightened. And that's a beautiful thought? She said, my star listens when I talk to it, Ella continued, even if it doesn't talk back. Ben moved closer, his brow drawn, but he didn't interrupt. I talk to Mom a lot, Ella said quietly, and now, sometimes I talk to other stars too, just in case someone else needs one. Ivy's lips parted, but no sound came out. Ella looked at her, her eyes clear and wise. I think you're missing a star. Ivy blinked. What do you mean? You look like someone who hasn't had a star in a long time. Ivy tried to laugh, but it came out fragile. Maybe I forgot how to look for mine. Ella smiled faintly. You can borrow one of mine. I have extras. Tears sprang to Ivy's eyes before she could stop them. Ben moved beside her and crouched down, laying a hand on Ivy's shoulder. Ella's like that, he said softly. She gives away light she doesn't even know she's carrying. Ivy wiped her face, shaking her head. How is she so kind? Ben's voice was low. Because she's had to understand pain too early, and she decided not to pass it on. Ivy turned toward Ella and reached out, taking the crumpled drawing in both hands. Can I keep this? She asked. Ella nodded solemnly. It's a wish star. You're supposed to whisper something to it when you're scared. I'll keep it close, Ivy promised. Later that evening, after Ella had drifted into another nap and the apartment grew still again, Ivy stepped onto the fire escape. The air was sharp, cool, tinged with city smoke and the faint scent of someone's late dinner wafting from below. Ben joined her a moment later, 2 mugs of tea in hand. He handed her one and leaned against the railing. She's amazing, Ivy said. She is. Ben agreed, but it's not just her heart that's broken. It's the waiting. The knowing time is short, and the answers are expensive. I hate how easily money decides who lives and who doesn't, Ivy said. He looked at her a little surprised. You sound like someone who knows that from the inside. I do, she said quietly. My mother died from a cancer we didn't catch early enough. Not because she didn't have insurance, she did, but because she didn't want to seem fragile. She missed her screenings for 2 years because of her position on the board. Ben exhaled slowly. She was brilliant, Ivy continued, and terrified. Afraid if she showed weakness they'd take everything from her. And in the end, they did. Ben looked at her, his face softening. She told me something once Ivy set her eyes on the stars. She said, you can't lead with a wounded heart. People smell blood. Ivy paused. I think she was wrong. I think she was protecting you, Ben offered gently. I think she didn't know how to be soft and survive. They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder. I've been running for a long time, Ivy admitted. Even when I was still showing up, I was gone. But something about this place, this girl you... She stopped, shaking her head. It's the first time I've felt like I'm not disappearing. Ben didn't speak for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded note. I wasn't going to show you this yet, he said. But Ella wrote it this morning while I was signing release papers. He handed it to her. Ivy unfolded it slowly. In messy, crooked letters it read, Dear Miss Ivy, you don't have to run anymore. I think your star found you. Ivy pressed the note to her chest. In the quiet that followed, she whispered into the night, I think maybe it did. The next morning arrived slowly with a dull gray light that crept through the curtains and stretched long shadows across the apartment floor. The rain had stopped, but its chill remained in the air, clinging to the corners of the room like unspoken thoughts. Ivy stood in the kitchen wearing one of Ben's flannel shirts over her dress from the day before. It hung loosely on her frame sleeves, rolled up as she poured water into a kettle. There was something strange and sacred about these quiet domestic rituals, things she had never allowed herself time to know. The click of the burner, the whistle of steam, the hum of life when no one was performing for anyone. Ella was still sleeping on the couch, bundled beneath a tower of mismatched blankets. Her breathing was steady, cheeks flushed with a healthy pink. Ivy had tucked the drawing of the star under the girl's pillow before bed, whispering a wish to it, like she'd promised. She turned to see Ben step out of the hallway, shirt-wrinkled hair tousled, the weariness of long nights settling in his shoulders, but when he looked at her, something eased. "Morning," he said, voice low and gravelly. "Morning," Ivy replied. "Tea." He nodded, moving to help. For a while they stood in companionable silence, passing mugs, buttering toast as if this were their life, simple, shared, real. But peace, Ivy knew too well, was never meant to last when your world had cracks you hadn't yet sealed. Her phone rang. Not the disposable one. The other one. The one she had buried in the bottom of her purse. The one she had turned off. Ben watched as she stiffened, her eyes locked on the vibrating device on the counter. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen in 3 days, Mother. The air shifted. "You okay?" Ben asked gently. Ivy didn't answer. She picked up the phone with slow fingers, her breath shallow. "I have to take this," she murmured. "I'll be outside." She stepped onto the fire escape again, this time with no mug in hand. Just the phone pressed against her ear and her other hand braced against the railing. She answered. Her mother's voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "Ivy." There was no hello. No, "Are you safe?" No, "I miss you." Just pressure wrapped in syllables. "I've been patient. You've made your point and we've given you space. But enough is enough. You're being reckless." Ivy closed her eyes. "I'm not coming back, Mother." "Oh, you're not," came the clipped reply. "Do you understand what you're destroying? This marriage isn't about you. It's about the company, the foundation, the future of control." Ivy finished. "It's about control. Yours." There was a sharp pause. "You are not some starving poet living in a fourth-floor walk-up, Ivy. You are a Whitmore. You are meant for legacy. I'm not meant for anything. I didn't choose," Ivy said, voice steadier now. Her mother's tone sharpened. "Do you think we can keep this out of the news? You vanished. There are questions. There are board members. Do you understand what your behavior costs the family?" "I know exactly what it costs," Ivy said. "I've been paying the price since I was 12. "Ivy, no. Listen to me." Her voice cracked but didn't waver. "You raised me to be a weapon. Efficient, marketable, loveless. You paraded me through fundraisers and called it parenting. And I played the part. But I'm done. You don't get to walk away from this life like it's a bad dream. I didn't walk away." Ivy stared into the pale sky, wind lifting her hair. "I ran. And I found something I wasn't supposed to find." Her mother exhaled long and slow. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," Ivy said softly. "But for once, it'll be mine." She ended the call. Her hands shook. She stood there for a while, trying to remember how to breathe. Ben was sitting on the couch when she stepped back in his eyes, searching her face. "Bad call?" he asked. Ivy nodded. "Necessary one." He motioned to the chair across from him. "Want to talk about it?" "I just did," she said. "For the first time in my life, I said everything I meant. And now I'm shaking like I'm about to pass out in a courtroom." Ben chuckled lightly. "Sounds like you won." "I don't feel like I did." "That's because winning doesn't always look like a trophy," he said. "Sometimes it just looks like staying upright." Ivy gave him a weak smile. Then her expression turned serious. "I need to do something," she said, "before it's too late." Ben leaned forward. "What do you mean I need to stop hiding? Not just from them, from myself." She pulled the chair closer, her eyes bright with something new, resolve maybe, or the start of it. "You said something the other night," she continued. "About Ella. How she gives away light she doesn't know she has. And I realized I've been doing the opposite. hoarding what I have like the world will eat me alive if I show it. Ben said nothing, letting her speak. I don't want to live like that anymore. A long pause. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out the business card Ben had barely looked at since she gave it to him. The foundation, she said. Call them. Today. Use my name. They'll listen. Ben stared at the card. Why are you doing this? Because I can. Because I should have done it the first night. Because I'm tired of being someone who only gives to the world when she's dying inside. Her voice wavered slightly. I don't know what I'm doing, Ben. I really don't. But I know that your daughter has more courage in her pinky finger than I've had in 30 years, and I'd like to be someone she doesn't have to give her star to. Ben swallowed hard, the air thick with something unnameable. You already are, he said quietly. She looked up. Someone worth the light. The third morning dawned without ceremony. No fanfare, no epiphanies. Just the quiet patter of rain returning against the windows and the faint smell of cinnamon from the leftover oatmeal Ben had warmed up for Ella. Ivy sat at the kitchen table staring into a mug of tea gone cold, a folded envelope clutched in her hand. She hadn't opened it yet, but she knew what it was. Her final contract. The marriage agreement. The legal blueprint of a future she'd once been too exhausted to resist. Ben stood across from her, elbow deep in a sink of sudsy water, humming low under his breath as Ella giggled from the couch at an old cartoon. The air in the apartment buzzed with something close to contentment, and yet Ivy felt like she was standing on a ledge. 3 days ago she had planned to disappear into that empty high-rise and numb herself with silence. She had expected the world to keep turning without her. Maybe it would have. Maybe it still could. But now she was no longer sure she wanted to be absent from it. She opened the envelope. Her name was printed in bold ink across the top, Ivy Whitmore. Below it, terms, conditions, expectations. Her future broken down into clauses and bullet points. An addendum in red ink had been added since she'd gone missing. It read, If bride fails to appear at scheduled ceremony, the Whitmore Family Trust reserves the right to withdraw support from all philanthropic ventures attached to her public platform. Ivy let out a slow breath. So that was it. Marry him, or watch every public good initiative she had fought to sneak through corporate meetings get pulled like weeds. They were betting on her guilt. She stood, slowly walked to the sink and set the paper down beside Ben. He looked up. What's this? My final offer, she said. He dried his hands, picked up the envelope, skimmed it. His jaw tightened as he read. This isn't a marriage proposal. It's a hostage negotiation. I know. Ben met her eyes. What are you going to do? She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the couch where Ella sat curled beside a patchwork of pillows and half-colored drawings. Ivy knelt down and picked up the wish star. It was smudged now, but still intact. I made a promise to this star, Ivy said, and I think today's the day I keep it. 2 hours later, she was standing in front of a long glass building in Midtown, shoulders squared, hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. No makeup, no heels, no press, just her. She walked into the foundation's office without an appointment, requested to speak to the director, and handed over her name. The receptionist blinked. As in, the Ivy Whitmore, yes, she said, and I need your help. 10 minutes later, she sat across from a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a navy blue sweater. The office was small, filled with photos of children and stacks of grant paperwork. I'm told you fund last-minute pediatric cases, Ivy began. We do, yes, the man said, measured. But the wait list is long and funding is always tight. Ivy reached into her bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I want to cover one of them. Personally. Quietly. He raised a brow. My name still carries some weight, she said. Use it. Not for me. For a little girl named Ella Hadley. She's 8. She's got a father who would walk through fire barefoot just to buy her one more day. The director leaned back, watching her. Why, her Ivy's eyes softened. Because she gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. And what's that? Ivy smiled faintly. Permission to feel again. That evening, she returned to the apartment soaked through from the rain, her boots squishing with every step. Ella ran to the door with her blanket draped over her shoulders like a cape. "You look like a superhero," Ivy said, crouching to embrace her. Ella grinned. "You look like a wet cat." Ben appeared behind her, arms crossed. "Everything okay?" Ivy stood, her heart thudding louder than it should have. "Yeah, I think it is." She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded letter. He opened it carefully, eyes scanning the page. After a long beat, he looked up. "You paid for the entire surgery." "I put the funds in place," she said. "The foundation will handle the details. It's all anonymous unless you want them to know." Ben looked stunned. "Why would you do this?" Ivy hesitated, her voice unsteady. "Because if I go back to that world, I need to know I left something behind that mattered. Something better than a headline." Ben stepped forward, eyes searching hers. "Ivy, you don't have to go back." She smiled sadly. "I do. For now. There are things I have to face, things I have to finish." He nodded, but his jaw clenched. "So this is goodbye." "No," she said, reaching for his hand. "This is the beginning of the end. And after that, who knows?" They stood there, palms pressed, silence between them, stretched taut with everything unspoken. From the couch, Ella called out, "Is anyone going to finish my flying unicorn or what?" They laughed, soft and real and a little sad. And for the first time in days, Ivy felt grounded, present, whole. Later that night, after Ella was asleep and Ben had gone to bed, Ivy sat alone on the fire escape one last time. The rain had stopped. The sky had cleared. She pulled the star drawing from her pocket and looked up. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me who I could be." Then, slowly, she folded the paper into a tiny square and tucked it into the pocket of her coat right next to her heart. Tomorrow, she would vanish again. But this time, she wouldn't be running. She'd be returning. The next morning, the apartment was quieter than usual. Too quiet. Ben stirred from sleep as sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, drawing soft stripes across the worn floorboards. He reached toward the other side of the bed instinctively, though he knew it was empty. Ivy had never spent the night there, not fully. She'd always left the door cracked open between presence and distance, as if she couldn't let herself belong to the stillness. And now she was gone. Her coat was no longer hanging by the door. Her shoes, those scuffed, rain-damp boots, had vanished from their place by the wall. The half-full mug of tea she'd left on the windowsill was washed and set upside down on the rack. Only the faint scent of her shampoo lingered in the air like a memory already fading. Ben walked into the kitchen, heart thudding with a dull ache he didn't have the words to name. On the table sat a single envelope. No name, just his. He hesitated before opening it, staring at the crease of the fold as if it might change its mind. Then, with a slow breath, he peeled it open. "Ben, I thought maybe I could stay longer, that I could slip into this life like a forgotten sweater and pretend I'd always belonged here. You made that feel possible. Ella made it feel real. But people like me, we don't just disappear into someone else's life. Not without finishing the mess we left behind. Today is my third day, the last one I promised myself, so I'm keeping my promise. But I want you to know something. You changed me, not with speeches or grand gestures, but by just being. Quietly, steadily, honestly. You and Ella reminded me that kindness is not weakness, that love doesn't have to be perfect to be life-saving. I hope you'll tell her that her star worked. And I hope you'll save a little space somewhere in this messy, beautiful world for someone still trying to find her way back. Yours, Ivy." Ben read the letter twice, then a third time. He didn't cry. He wasn't sure he could. The grief was different this time. It wasn't the crashing kind, like when Sarah died. It was the hollow kind, like standing in a house that had been lived in only to find all the furniture gone. He sat down slowly at the table and stared out the window, half expecting her to walk back through the door with some excuse, some joke, some reason to pretend she hadn't left. But the silence only answered him. Ella found him there an hour later, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her oxygen cord trailing behind her like a silken leash. "Where's Miss Ivy?" she asked, climbing into his lap without hesitation. Ben held her close. She had to go. Ella blinked up at him. Go where Ben didn't answer right away. He smoothed a strand of hair behind her ear. She had something important to finish, but she left a note. Ella's face fell. She said she'd finish the unicorn. "I think she did," Ben said, pulling something from the drawer, a folded sheet of paper with glitter pens and crooked outlines. Ella gasped. "She left it. She left it for you," he said, "and a little more." He reached for the wish star drawing still pinned above the bookshelf and brought it down. Ella unfolded it carefully. Now, in the bottom corner, Ivy had added something, a new line in her delicate handwriting. "You don't have to loan me a star anymore. I found mine. Love, Ivy." Ella pressed it to her chest just like Ivy had done days before. "I liked her," Ella whispered. "Me too." Days passed, then a week, then 2. Ben kept expecting something, an article, a photo, a headline. Heiress found after vanishing runaway CEO returns for wedding of the year. But the silence was deafening. No news, no rumors, just absence. He didn't know if that was her doing or a gift. One afternoon, while fixing a customer's brakes at the garage, his phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. He answered out of instinct. "Is this Mr. Hadley?" came a warm, professional voice. "Yes. This is Allison from the New Horizons Foundation. We just wanted to inform you that Ella's case has been prioritized and fully funded. Her surgery has been scheduled for the 15th. The specialist has already reviewed her file." Ben nearly dropped the wrench in his hand. I'm sorry," he stammered. "Fully funded." "Yes, sir." A private donor stepped in. The request came through 3 weeks ago under the name Whitmore. "We were instructed to tell you only after the file was locked and approved." Ben sat down on the curb outside the shop, the phone pressed tightly to his ear. "Is this really happening?" "It is," the voice replied gently. "You can focus on your daughter now." He hung up, staring at the clouds, his chest swelling with something close to disbelief. Then, like a wave, breaking joy washed over him. Sharp, aching joy. She had really done it. She had disappeared, but not without leaving behind a miracle. That night he tucked Ella in her cheeks, flushed with excitement after they told her the news. "Will Miss Ivy come back?" she asked. Ben paused. "I don't know, sweetheart." "I hope so." Ella looked thoughtful. "Maybe she's building a star of her own somewhere." Ben smiled. "Maybe she is." She reached under her pillow and pulled out the folded star drawing, smoothing it gently. "I'm going to make her a new one, just in case she needs it." Ben kissed her forehead. "I think she'd like that." As he turned off the light and walked into the living room, he glanced one last time at the couch where Ivy had once sat cross-legged coloring beside his daughter. It was empty now, but the space still felt full of what she had left behind, of who she had chosen to become, of the hope she had gifted like a quiet benediction. She was gone, but not lost, and sometimes Ben thought that was enough. It was a Tuesday morning in early December when Ben saw the for sale sign disappear from the little house at the end of Elm Street. He hadn't noticed it right away. Life had been a blur of preparation, hospital appointments, post-op protocols, and the slow, cautious return of color to Ella's cheeks. The days had grown colder, but inside their small apartment, warmth had returned in quiet, steady waves. So, when the moving truck pulled up at the corner lot and parked in the cracked driveway, Ben paid it little attention at first. He was hauling groceries up the stairs, Ella trailing behind him like a superhero with her oxygen backpack now replaced by a sparkly pink satchel. "Daddy," she said, pausing on the steps. "Someone's moving into the gingerbread house." Ben turned, frowning. "The what?" she pointed. "That one, with the red shutters. Looks like a cookie. You know." He followed her gaze. There across the street, a small craftsman-style home with weathered wood siding and faded red shutters now had its front door wide open. Sunlight poured into the foyer, bouncing off newly polished floors. A man unloaded boxes from the truck, but he wasn't wearing a uniform. No crew, no delivery staff, just one woman standing at the top of the steps, her back to the street. Ben felt the air still. The woman turned. She wore jean sneakers and a flannel coat far too big for her. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, a clipboard tucked under her arm, and in her hands a small ceramic pot of tulips. She looked at him and smiled. It wasn't the practiced smile of a CEO. It wasn't the photo-ready grin of a woman playing her part. It was Ivy. Real. Unarmored. Home. Ben froze. Ella, unaware of the thousand thoughts racing through her father's mind, waved excitedly. "Miss Ivy," she shrieked, bolting down the steps and across the street, arms outstretched. Ivy laughed, full, unfiltered joy as she crouched and caught the little girl in a warm hug. Ben followed slower, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the rest of the world. She looked up at him when he reached the porch, her eyes glinting in the winter light. "You're here," he said, almost breathless. She nodded, still holding Ella close. "I bought the house last week. You bought this house. I made the offer the morning I left," she said. "I didn't want to say anything until the ink dried." Ben blinked. "But I thought you had to go back." "I did, and I did." She stood, brushing her jeans. "I met with the board. I resigned. Publicly. Cleanly. I left everything they expected of me at the top floor of a glass tower and walked out with a plant and a paperclip." Ben stared at her, stunned. "I sold my shares, too," she added. "Most of them went into a new trust for single parents with medically vulnerable kids. The rest went to start something. Smaller. Smaller." She looked around at the little house. "Like this." Ben's voice dropped. "You really left it all?" "I left everything that wasn't mine," she said simply. "But I kept what I found." Ella tugged Ivy's hand. "Did you bring my unicorn drawing?" Ivy smiled. "I framed it. It's going in my new kitchen." Ben couldn't help it. He laughed, and the sound came out cracked with emotion. They stood there, a trio, on a porch that smelled faintly of fresh paint and old wood, the winter wind tugging at their sleeves. "I wanted to come back sooner," Ivy said quietly, turning to Ben. "But I needed to make sure I wasn't doing it just to run again. I wanted to arrive this time. For real." Ben's gaze softened. "You did." A silence fell between them, not empty, but full of everything they didn't need to say. Ella bounced on her heels. "Can we go see your kitchen?" Ivy laughed. "Only if you promise not to critique my color choices." "I make no promises." Ella grinned. Ivy opened the door and stepped aside to let her in. But before Ben could follow, Ivy reached out and caught his hand. He turned, startled by the warmth of her fingers. "I don't want to borrow your life," she said. "I don't want to slip into it like a guest." Ben waited. "I want to build something. Beside it. With it. Next to you. Not above, not beneath. Beside." Ben looked down at their hands, calloused fingers meeting polished ones, flawed and human and real. "I've got room," he said softly. She stepped closer. "I've got time," she added. Their foreheads touched, and for the first time in years it didn't feel like falling. It felt like landing. Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky in strokes of pink and ash, the porch light flickered on. Ivy stood by the window holding a mug of tea, watching Ella hang her wish star drawing on the wall of the new living room. Ben came up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. "She said she's going to teach you how to make waffles tomorrow," he murmured. Ivy leaned into him. "I was afraid you'd say no." "To waffles?" "To this." Ben kissed her temple. "I was afraid you wouldn't come back." She turned to him, eyes soft. "Well, I didn't just come back, Ben." She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded scrap of paper, creased and faded edges worn. It was the same one Ella had given her that night in the hospital. Ivy whispered, "I came home." Winter melted quietly into spring. Not with grand declarations, but in the shy unfurling of tulip buds in Ivy's front yard, in the way light stayed a little longer on the porch steps in the soft whistle of the wind through open windows that now smelled of fresh paint and lemon soap. The house on Elm Street no longer looked like a stranger to its street. Ivy had painted the shutters a soft forest green. The front porch had a wind chime made from old keys. A small wooden sign hung above the mailbox the countdown center. Open hearts, open doors. It wasn't a clinic, it wasn't a business. It was a place people came to when they didn't know where else to go. Single parents stopped in with questions about Medicaid forms, housing assistance, or just to borrow a quiet moment. Kids colored in a corner filled with books and mismatched beanbags. There was no front desk, just a coffee pot, a list of resources on the fridge, and Ivy usually sitting on the floor helping someone breathe through the paperwork that had once terrified her too. And on the back wall, framed in a wooden shadow box, hung a drawing. A 5-pointed star with small trembling letters. For people who forgot they had one. It was a Wednesday morning when Ivy found Ben in the backyard repairing the fence that the last storm had nudged loose. He wore a tool belt and an old shirt of hers, sleeves rolled and paint-flecked. Ella sat in a folding chair nearby dictating instructions from a how-to guide she had borrowed from the library. "Use the Phillips head," she called. "That's the one with the crossy part." Ben grinned, pretending to fumble. "This one. That's a butter knife." Ivy leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. She never said it aloud, but sometimes watching them felt like reading the last page of a book she'd always wanted to believe in. She walked down the steps, wiping her hands on her apron. "Lunch is ready." Ella bolted upright. "Grilled cheese or disappointment?" "Grilled cheese," Ivy said. "Victory!" the girl yelled and ran inside. Ben smiled as Ivy approached. "You make that girl feel invincible." "She made me feel visible," Ivy replied. "Fair trade." Ben set the drill down and pulled off his gloves. "You've built something here," he said. "Not just the house, something bigger." She sat beside him on the porch step. You know what the hardest part was. He looked at her waiting, letting go of the timeline I didn't choose. I thought if I walked away from it I'd be lost, but it turns out sometimes you have to break your own clock to start counting for real. Ben reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "So, what are we counting toward now?" Ivy leaned her head against his shoulder, quiet for a long beat. "Not toward," she said finally. "From." That evening, the living room glowed in soft lamplight. A jazz record spun in the background. Ella was asleep on the couch, a coloring book open on her lap. Her hair had grown back thicker since the surgery, her face fuller. She no longer looked sick. She looked unstoppable. Ben and Ivy stood in the kitchen barefoot on the cool tile floor. He poured 2 glasses of wine. To what she asked. He raised his glass. To the woman who answered her own countdown. Ivy clinked her glass to his. To the man who let her stay after. They drank, smiled. "I used to think love had to be loud," Ivy said softly, "like fireworks or grand entrances. But this," she gestured around the quiet room to the hum of the fridge, the laughter tucked into corners. "This is louder than anything I've ever known." Ben stepped closer, and quieter than fear. She nodded. "Exactly." They didn't kiss, not right away. They stood there, forehead to forehead, breathing the same air, holding the same time. And when they did kiss, it was not desperate or rushed. It was the kind of kiss that says, "I see you. I'm not going anywhere. We made it." A week later, Ivy stood under the wide oak tree in the center of town helping set up folding chairs for a local parenting support group. Spring breeze tugged at the hem of her skirt. Ella ran circles around the benches holding a paper kite Ben had made from scratch. A woman approached early 40s holding the hand of a little boy with a feeding tube and wide, anxious eyes. "I heard you take walk-ins," the woman said. "We do," Ivy replied. "And we also take sit-downs, meltdown days, paperwork rants, and second chances." The woman let out a breath she'd probably been holding for months. Ivy offered her a chair. "Start wherever you're comfortable." She didn't know it yet, but today was this woman's countdown. Day 1. and Ivy would be there. Not to rescue her, not to lead her, but to walk beside her, because she had learned something. Love doesn't always come thundering in. Sometimes it knocks gently, then stays, builds, grows, not a rescue, not a return, but a beginning. That night, back at home, Ivy tucked Ella into bed and turned off the lamp. She stepped outside to find Ben sitting on the porch swing, his arm outstretched, waiting for her. She curled into him without a word. Above them, the stars blinked quietly in the dark. Ivy looked up. "Which one do you think is mine?" she asked. Ben didn't look up. He looked at her and said, "You don't need one anymore." Ivy smiled. She already knew. Where are you watching from? We'd love to know. Drop your city or country in the comments and let us know how this story made you feel. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart, stir the soul, and remind us of the good that still exists in the world. Thank you so much for watching. Your time, your presence, and your heart mean the world to us.